So we've been looking at some of the implications of physicalism. What would also be true if the theory of physicalism is true? And now we're going to take this journey into probably the sort of the heaviest implication for physicalism. And the question for us will be this. If the theory of physicalism is true and provides an accurate description of the way that reality is structured, could the concept of moral responsibility exist as well in any kind of logically coherent way? Okay, so if physicalism is true, can the concept of moral responsibility exist in reality with logical coherence? All right, so we're going to start this exploration. I'm going to tell you a story. And this goes back like 10 or 11 years at this point. My daughter was 15. She was a student at the Academy of the Redwoods. And one of the cool things about that was, as I was driving into my office every day, I got to take her to school. And so we had, half hour each way on the road together each day. And it was really kind of nice. And so anyway, one day we're driving down 101 and we go underneath the Herrick Elk River overpass there. And on comes this truck onto 101 on the freeway, and he kind of darts out in front of us, and he's driving a truck that kind of looks like this. This isn't the exact truck, but it was kind of a white, American made, a Dodge or Chevy, I can't remember, truck. It wasn't new, it wasn't particularly beat up, but it clearly wasn't new or in some really nice condition. And I think it was either on the tailgate or the back window, but I think it was the tailgate because it seemed that much more sort of in your face, was in huge letters, show your, and then a vulgarity for breasts on the tailgate. I mean, it was just so right in your face. And of course, beneath that was the requisite, giant balls hanging off of the trailer hitch. And I remember my daughter, with this kind of look of disgust, she said, "What type of person drives this?" Right? And she wasn't asking about the truck. She was, what type of person presents themselves to the rest of the world in this manner? And I thought, that's a good question, because I think we could develop some answers that are probably more likely than other answers. And what I mean by that is this, is when you consider the circumstances of this person's life who's driving this truck, does it seem more likely that they're 16, just got their driver's license, and man, I'm boogieing out there in my truck? Does it seem more likely that they're 35, 40? Is this a married person? Somebody partnered? Is this a 70-year-old woman? Is that what's likely? If you had to put your money down, you got to make a bet. Is this a man or a woman? Is this somebody who's really old, really young, or somebody who's middle-aged? Is this somebody who's really wealthy? Is this somebody who works for a grammar school? Or is this somebody who works construction? Or is this somebody who's like a fancy investment broker? And of course, that some of these, they're all possible. But that some of these are far more likely than others. It is far more likely that it's a male rather than female driving this. It's far more likely that this is a person who is not working in places like elementary schools. They're probably not a real estate agent. Hey, get in my truck and I'll go show you some properties. It's probably more likely that this is a person who works in some sort of trade. And that kind of ties in with it being a truck, a kind of utility vehicle. And so you can come up with it's almost like a profile, right? We're stereotyping, of course, and we could be wrong. But you can see that instinctively you start going towards certain kinds of features being associated with this person over others. And you could do the same thing with this person's sort of psychological state. What kinds of things does this person value or believe? What is it that they're looking for? What do they desire? What are they afraid of? Right? And again, we're stereotyping and we could get it wrong. But I'm going to imagine you're going to say things like, well, this person could be a feminist, but I'm guessing not. What usually happens in discussions of this with a class, a face-to-face class, is the discussion will break down into two groups. And there'll be one group of folks that come forward and they say, this is, your sort of 35, 40-year-old, unpartnered, construction tradey type worker who really is desperate for the attention of women. And he wants to be seen by women. He wants women to be attracted to him. And that's why he's sort of projecting this like hyper masculine image of himself out into the world for all to see. And then there will be this other group of folks that step forward and say, totally agree with you on the sort of probably high schoolish level of education, maybe a little bit of college. Agree with you that probably working in some sort of trade, I agree it's a man, and so forth. But then they fall down on this opposite side and they'll say, I don't think that this person desires or is motivated by gaining attention of women. I don't think that this is a person who fears not having women attracted to him and is therefore putting this hyper-masculine portrait of himself out into the world as a way of getting men. We don't agree with that, they'll say. They'll say, this is a display of hyper-masculinity that is targeted to other men, right? This isn't, it's probably less likely that a woman is driving behind this truck and thinking like, oh, balls hanging off of the trailer hitch. That's my kind of guy, right? Instead, what they'll say is, oh, this is clearly a guy who's wanting the sort of his peer group of men to kind of look at this and be like, dude, that kind of thing. So this is a person who's looking for the attention, for the approval of his peer group of men. And then they'll sort of go down this really kind of interesting rabbit hole where they say, and it's interesting that he's looking for this approval or this attention from other men based on his identity as a sexual person. Why is he interested in gaining the approval of other men in his peer group by presenting himself as a sort of hypersexualized, hypermasculine male into the world? So, of course, we could be wrong about all of this, right? We're totally stereotyping here. But the point is this, is think about how this relates to what we know about what the physicalists say, right? So the physicalists are saying, everything that occurs because of a particular set of circumstances that cause things to occur as they do. And of course, decisions, physicalists say, are events that occur. And those decisions occur because of the totality of our psychological makeup, because of the circumstances that we find ourselves in a particular time. And the decisions that occur were the decisions that had to occur based on the way that things were. And so all we're doing here is we're saying, well, let's back up. What would be some of the conditions that would likely have to exist in order for the person driving the truck to have made this series of decisions about how to present himself to the world, right? So it's in a way we're kind of profiling. We're backing up from an event that we experience and say, I think I can figure out in reverse what series of events took place to lead to this present moment. Now, it also works in the other direction. Okay, so I'll tell you another story, and this goes even back further. When my kid was in grammar school, she had a friend named Jessica, and Jessica was a really sweet kid. And I never met her father because for the whole time that we lived in the same area, her father had been in jail. And I don't even know if she had met her father. I think her father went to jail shortly after she was born. But we did have lots of opportunity to interact with her mother. And her mother always presented herself in a kind of hypersexualized way. Lots of sort of glitter, lots of belly shirts. So you'd show up to like the kids are going to have a roller skating party, and here comes Jessica mom, and she's wearing the short shorts and the so anyway, this is how she's chosen to present herself. She's got this giant Playboy bunny stuck in the rear window of her car. So again, it's this sort of there's a series of events that took place that caused her to choose to present herself to the world in the way that she did. All right. So now that's the circumstances. Now you have to make a guess. What do you think ended up happening with Jessica? Right? Did she become like her mom? Or did she say, you know what? I don't like that path. I'm going to choose a different one. I'm going to become, again, this is how it usually falls down. Oh, Jessica must have become a very sort of reserved, shy, very sort of ordinary young woman because she didn't want to go down the same path as her mom. And then there'll be others that say, oh no, she would have been desperately seeking the attention of men because of the absence of her father and a male role model. And she would have come to the conclusion that because her mother was able to get the attention of men by presenting herself to the world in the way that she did, that she should also present herself into the world in that way. Right? So generally it comes down like, well, these are the two possibilities. Well, what do you think? What's more likely? And I won't tell you what actually happened. Oh, no, I will. Yeah, Jessica became like her mom. All right, so what is this telling us? This is telling us that The physicalists may be onto something. We seem to be able to predict with pretty good reliability what series of events led to an event that we experience, like the truck on the freeway, and we seem to be able to predict what the current set of conditions that exist now are ultimately going to lead to. Okay? And a great example of how, or not great example, great evidence for the physicalists having their finger on the pulse of the way that reality is structured is the story of Jim Lewis and Jim Springer. Okay? So check this out. They were separated at birth, both put into adopted families, and then went on to live completely separate lives. I mean, when I say completely, I mean not only did they not know of each other, the adoptive parents didn't know of each other. They didn't know anything of their existence, these two babies at this point, and then into men. They didn't know anything about the other person. They didn't know anything about having been born a twin. They didn't know anything about the other adopted family. So they lived completely separate lives. All right. They were both named James by their adoptive parents. Okay? Again, the adoptive parents didn't know each other. But just by coincidence, they named each of them James. Both of these guys got married twice. Okay, so they both had 2 marriages. Both of their first wives' name was Linda. God, so weird. And then when they married a second time, they both married a woman named Betty. Right? So again, they had no knowledge of each other's existence. They also gave almost the same name to their oldest sons. One named their son James Allen with 1 L, and the other one named him James Allen with 2 L's. They both chain smoked the exact same kind of cigarettes, and they both drank the same kind of beer. They were both cops. Come on. They both owned dogs named Toy. They both had a hobby of making furniture in their garage. They both drove Chevys. They went to the same beach in Florida for vacation. And they both lived on blocks that only had one house, and it was a house they lived in. All right. I mean, come on. Coincidence? Coincidences? Maybe. But I think a physicalist is going to point at this and say, haha, told you so. I know how reality is structured, and you can predict how things are going to happen because of the physical things that exist in the way that they exist at a given moment in time. All right, so there's some pretty compelling evidence for the physicalists that things that occur are determined to occur in the way that they do because of the way that things are the moment the event happens. Okay, so the key word here is determined. That guy that drove onto the freeway, that was determined to manifest as the experience that it did in the way that it did because of all of the previous events that took place that were rooted in this person's psychological circumstances. The story of Jessica, where she wound up was where she was determined to wind up, the physicalists say, because of all of the physical events that were taking place throughout the course of her life. They led inevitably to where she wound up. And same thing with Jim and Jim. It's like something wacky goes on that we can't recognize. It's right into our physical features that causes us to make certain kinds of decisions, like name our dog Troy and marry Betty and Linda. All right? So think about that. It's kind of freaky.